Is the sumo deadlift cheating? Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and this is a topic I see come up all the time, and it's one of those that a lot of people have opinions on. A lot of people have very strong opinions on it. And here's the things to think about with it, and I think that people forget. I'm a coach who coaches both. Some of my lifters pull sumo, some pull conventional, some of them compete in both as well as far as powerlifting meets. And a lot of my lifters, we train both. I personally have trained both. I prefer conventional. I have always pulled conventional in meets. Okay, my best PRs are always conventional. So that being said, based upon my personal history, I obviously would be prone to have some bias towards a conventional deadlift. It's my favorite exercise. However, when it gets over to the topic of sumo, and I think if we step back and we're just rational about it and reasonable and look at it objectively, I don't think it's cheating. I really don't think it's cheating. Now, that being said, if powerlifting rules wanted to change to remove sumo, and that was the route that people decided to go, I wouldn't have that big of a problem with that. Why? Because it would be standardized across the board in the sport, and as long as everything is standardized, you know what? Perfectly fine with that. However, I don't make the rules for powerlifting. There's multiple federations, and convincing them all to ban sumo, not very likely. So as it stands, you're probably not going to see that happening. But here's the real question. The question becomes, is it cheating? Because for it to be cheating, it would have to give a real advantage. Some people point out the range of motion's a little shorter. That's true, but on a deadlift, the entire deadlift is a bit of a partial anyways. It's a movement most of us can move real big weights on. And there's a lot of factors that determine what you're strongest at. And here's the thing to think about, particularly when you get to the big boys, the bigger lifters. You don't really find sumo setting as many total records. Okay, it tends to be shorter, lighter lifters. It tends to be a lot of times lighter women. That's where you see the real advantage at. Now, what does that mean, though? Does that mean that women in lighter weight classes are going to have to all pull sumo if they want to be the best? Well, I don't necessarily think that's the case either. Right? Again, there are plenty of women setting world records conventional, but definitely when we get to the real big boys, you do see conventional kind of dominating. It's a slight bias in that direction. So that being said, it's not the case. It's automatically going to give you an advantage. That shorter range of motion has different leverages involved. And, again, because it's being pulled from the floor, all those things, it's a little different. Now, when you start getting into really whippy bars, okay, yes, sumo starts to get more into cheating, but when we're dealing, say, with meet legal bars, which are not always super whippy, and we're dealing with calibrated plates, I don't think sumo necessarily automatically has a real advantage. Now, for gym lifts, when you see people using bumper plates and they're strapping up with, particularly strapping up, using bumper plates, sometimes with the weights pulled all the way to the ends or the heavier weights on the end, yeah, the sumo is absolutely cheating at that point, because sumos tend to be a little harder right off the floor. A lot of times for conventional pullers, we usually don't always miss it right off the floor. Like if a weight's just a little too heavy, it's usually not where we miss it, is right at the floor. A lot of times with sumo, if you can get it started, unless you have like a glaring hamstring weakness, odds are you're going to lock it. So when you get into that where people are running really whippy setups, plates all the way spaced further out on the ends instead of running them in tight. Like, see, I'm using calibrated plates on everything. The weights are all closer to the collars, right? Because the plates are thinner. Those 45-pound plates are only an inch thick when calibrated. So there's going to be less bar whip, less bar bend. Okay. All right. But when it's the opposite, yeah, sumo can start to have more of an advantage because that tends to be the weakest point on a sumo is breaking it off the floor. And then you turn into a partial, slightly reduced range of motion after that. Well, yeah, it starts to become, a real advantage. Therefore, yeah, it's definitely cheating in that context. Once you start going to those sort of bar and plate setups, yeah, sumo can turn into cheating. When equipped lifting dominated, you did see a little more bias. West Side oftentimes were big on sumo pulls. They always pulled both. So it's quite a few sumo pullers really coming out of there with the big boys. Why? Because they're running multiply suits. We come back over to the same thing. It helps with the pop off the floor. Well, that's when it can start to really become an advantage. But when we start dealing with, calibrated steel plates that are denser, closer to the center, so less bar bend, no deadlift suit, no. I think it's 50-50 in that case. I think about half of lifters across the board, no matter how they train, or if they train both, because that's a great way to observe it. I personally have a lot of clients who we do max and speed work on both. They train both year round. That's when you start really noticing that about half of lifters pull more sumo and about half pull more conventional if they put equal time into each. It's about 50-50. Well, if that's the case, it's not really cheating other than just some lifters are stronger with it. But it's certainly not universally true. And it's the same with benching. People will say, but that range of motion, yeah, but if that was true, then every bencher would be stronger with an ultra wide grip. All the way as far as you could grip meet legal. They would all be stronger that way. But they're not. Some are. Some definitely are. But you still see world record benchers who are in a lot closer, who add an extra inch or two to the range of motion. Okay? Shorter range of motion can be an advantage, but keep in mind, in some cases it's coming with less leverage advantage to make up for the shorter distance. Okay, sumo can turn into that for a lot of people. So really it comes down to where you're strong at, what's going on with your levers. So realistically, I don't think it really counts as cheating. But could people make the case? Could they make the case that it's a different lift? So maybe we shouldn't compare it. I don't think that's an unreasonable point. That's a perfectly reasonable point. Of course, a lot of people in the comments might not get to the end before they chime in and say that and not realize that I think that that's a reasonable point. But we would need powerlifting as a whole to change. But I will say that if you personally want to count it as a different lift and tell someone, well, what's your conventional pull? If they're pulling more than you sumo you don't see them doing any conventional pulling, you could make that point and say, but it's not an equal comparison. And that's kind of your personal opinion, and I actually don't have a problem with that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.